I hadn't seen her in probably about 10 years, and we were just like catching up on like our careers and what the industry is doing. And I was saying that, yeah, like I've worked so hard and I feel like people can't see me and I'm fucking over it and I'm tired of playing by the rules and I'm just going to go do my own thing because I'm tired of being nobody's first choice. And she stopped me and she was like, okay, that's fine, but the more you say that, the more that will be true. And you just took the energy in the room from up here and tanked it. And that's not the first time I've heard that. Hello, welcome to the Power of Imperfect Action podcast. I'm Michelle, that's George, here's Ozzy. They're hungry, which is why they're here. I'm gonna start talking and they're gonna disappear. But welcome. I almost didn't turn on the podcast and do the thing today. I was this close to just being like, you know what? Today's not the day, blah, 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 blah. And well, sometimes, yes, you got to listen to that voice. Sometimes, especially when you're trying new things and you're really starting to feel the discomfort in the new things, sometimes you got to decide if it's the right time to push through that. And so today I'm going to see if pushing through it is the right answer. I guess we'll find out after. I've been feeling really, really anxious today, as I do most days, but for whatever reason, this usually happens to me on Mondays. And I have the privilege and have built a life for myself where I don't necessarily have to function Monday to Friday like a lot of people do. And so like Monday doesn't need to be a big work day for me, yet it is still programmed into my mind that on Monday, you got to get up and you got to get to work. And I don't know if it's like an email thing where people are expecting responses from me. I don't know, but I often have anxiety on Mondays. And today, I don't know what it was about. I couldn't tell you why suddenly I'm feeling super anxious. Yes, I'm trying a lot of new things, which is inherently uncomfortable and new. And so there's a lot of things I'm still trying to figure out. I still don't know if I'm articulating myself well for a podcast. I find that I over-explain and talk too much because, trauma. And I just like talking. And so there's like all these things that I'm trying to weigh. And then there's very much this decision fatigue that sort of encompasses everything I do, trying to keep all the balls I have up in the air all at once and deciding which ones to look at and focus on each day. It's a little bit tiring. And so I'm battling that within myself today. But I decided that I'm going to do the podcast anyway, because I'm trying to create a rhythm and a schedule for myself. I almost, after editing last week's podcast, I almost threw my computer out the window. So I'm going to have to find a better system for myself. I'm going to have to probably batch create podcasts and figure out how to do that. I'm also going to have to find a better option to be editing than on my MacBook Pro, because apparently there's not enough space. And then there's also not enough space in my iCloud. And so there's just not enough space. And so it was a very challenging podcast episode last time, but I got it done and it went out and people liked it. So there's something to it. There's something here, and we're all going to figure it out together. And thank you so much for all of your wonderful comments and words of support and just love. I really am feeling it. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me. Maybe one day I'll read some of the really nice comments, but just knowing that what I'm talking about is hitting people and resonating with people makes this a fulfilling experience for me. I'm absolutely not trying to try something new with this podcast because I want your pity. That is not what I want. It is interesting when you share about yourself vulnerably. Like, I would say it's fairly vulnerable. I did have a bit of a vulnerability hangover last week. It's interesting when you share yourself, the different perspectives, the different ideas and windows that people hear the information through. So I know I'm speaking about one thing, but other people, depending on their lens and their perspective in life and what they're experiencing in that moment, will hear something completely different. And I've noticed it a little bit with my staff and lightsaber videos over time, but it's so much more evident when I'm just sharing directly from my life, where people are projecting their own stuff onto me when I was like, that wasn't even what I was talking about. That's their thing. That's their projection. But it's interesting to me, this like little bit of like fascinating look into people of I'm sharing something personal about my life, but it's hitting people in different ways. Super, super, super interesting. Like I'm like fascinated by it. And maybe I will delve more into that in my future. Now, enough. I was like, and I talk too much, blah, blah, blah. Here I am again, stretching on my floor. I do want to say one little comment I got on Instagram. So I shared a very short little blurb of this on Instagram in a vertical feed. So you're only seeing this part of my body. And I happened to be sitting like this at the time because I was stretching my quads and my hip flexor. And somebody, obviously on Instagram, you didn't get my explanation of like, I'm stretching. This is a thing I do. I sit on the floor. Somebody wrote in that like, what's with the pose? Are you starting an OnlyFans now? Gross. Unfollow. I was sitting like this. And to me, I'm stretching, but like if somebody doesn't know, then yeah, maybe that's what they would see. Like I get it, but I thought it was very dramatic and very fun. And it made me want to do more. So if you're seeing this as a vertical video on Instagram, I am stretching for real. I have not started an OnlyFans yet, but I'm not going to say never, like who knows? Maybe I'll feel so comfortable that I'll share more of myself. Probably not, but the people who do it, all the power to you. I think it's wonderful and very powerful that people are able to share themselves in that capacity. I don't think it's me, but never say never. I heard people make a very good living doing that. Anyway, hi. I was talking about over talking and over explaining, and then I did, how long? 8 minutes of just talking. Anyway, so today what I wanted to talk about is something that I've been thinking about and processing and sort of churning in my mind a lot recently. And it's something that I think is probably the hardest part in healing and changing your life. And I have been called out several times by some of my very good friends about it. And I'm talking about reframing our past, reframing our stories that we tell ourselves, all those limiting stories. And I am this, I am that, I am that, those stories. So I'm lazy and I'm a procrastinator and this happened to me and I always do this and I always do that. Those little stories that sort of circulate in our minds. And if you're like me, where it's just going constantly and it never fucking stops, those stories are what shape our reality, because we are the creators of our own reality. And there's a word for it. It's the pattern recognition within our frontal lobe. So our brains are made to recognize patterns. And so in doing so, we create patterns and conditions and parameters about ourselves in order to survive in the world. And then we keep telling those stories and those conditions about ourselves. And then that becomes what we are, because again, we create our own reality. But if you reiterate it enough, that's what people learn of you. And that's constantly the energy that you're putting out there. And so what I'm realizing right now is I'm trying to shift and I'm trying to tell my story from an uplifting and empowered place. I'm doing that thing where my breath is getting up here. So I'm just going to take a moment and drop back down into my belly. I recently took this is totally off topic, what I was just talking about. I recently took an acting class focused on breath work, voice work. It's Fitzmaurice and Meisner sort of rolled into one, taught by Lori Triolo. And one of the things she said that's really stuck with me is gravity, like drop into gravity, because we're so used to, especially athletes and women, we're so used to like pulling everything in and up and constricting ourselves rather than just relaxing and then speaking from there. So that's something that I'm trying actively to practice in my daily life. Kind of in the line of reframing our lives. I want to tell you a story to sort of set this off. So gather round, kids. Gather round. So I started baton twirling when I was 5. And initially, I was not very good at it. I actually was probably the weakest twirler in my class. At the time, there was probably about 10 kids in my class. We're all around the same age, that sort of beginner level. And I was one of the weaker kids. And I just wasn't picking things up as fast as everyone else. And I knew that at the moment in that time between ages 5 and 7, I didn't really care. I was kind of meh about baton. There was a lot of things I didn't like about it, and sort of feeling like I was behind. I didn't feel really inspired by it. I think it's because I was born left-handed, honestly. And a lot of the things we were learning were in our right hand. So I just, at that time, I was not wired for the right side. That's not really what this story's about. But slowly over time, a lot of those kids in my class started disappearing or moving on to other activities. And it ended up that there was only 3 or 4 of us by the time I got to 7 years old. So there's only a few of us remaining. And now we were starting to move into, we're not the total baby beginners anymore. Like, these are the kids that are going to move on and progress in the sport. And around that age, that would have been like late 80s. No, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, around then. In the province I grew up in Canada, in Alberta. Oh, ouch. In the province I grew up in Alberta, there were these regular, we called them clinics. So like weekend intensive workshops for all of the athletes in the province. And there was one program called the Talent ID program, where they take the younger athletes, they identify who the ones with potential are, and then they send them to this little weekend boot camp, and you're sort of like on your way. You don't get any funding, you don't get any of that. It's just being recognized as like some of the new up and comers that are really going to be nurtured in the sport. And everyone else in my little class of 4 people got chosen to join the Talent ID workshop. And I wasn't. And I remember it very clearly. I remember there were a couple of the adult coaches, my mom and the other coaches, and them saying that unfortunately we didn't choose Michelle for the Talent ID camp. We just don't see that she has any potential in the sport. Like, I remember this so clearly. And I was a smart kid. And I was also a very strong-willed kid. And I remember knowing what that meant. Maybe I didn't understand quite what the word potential really meant, but I remember knowing what was being implied. I wasn't good enough. They didn't think I would ever be good enough. We're just not going to give her any attention any further. It didn't mean that I needed to quit the sport, but it just meant that I was the one being left out of this activity that my friends were going to. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. And I was like, when this happened, I was 7 years old. So I was 7 years old in the sport, hadn't quite found any success in it yet. And I was already being told that I didn't have any potential. And that lit a fire in me. And this is a common theme that would occur in my life often, is me feeling like I was being left behind or something wasn't what I wanted it to be, and this fire being lit within me. And from that day forward, when I heard that Michelle doesn't have any potential, it lit this fire of, oh, I am going to show you my potential. Watch me. And I don't know what happened. I think my mom might have argued just to get me in. Because she's like, she's 7. It doesn't matter. Also, how can you tell if somebody has potential at 7? Anyway, so I ended up going, and I don't remember what happened, but I remember that moment of being like, somebody doesn't think that I can do this. I'm going to show them. There's this fire and this passion and this determination, and oh, you're going to see it. And this happened again several times in my life. So that was a moment that I remember that's when I really started to progress seriously in the sport of baton. At that moment in time, I was probably only practicing once, maybe twice a week. And then very soon after that, within the next year or so, the amount of days that I was practicing increased significantly. And part of that was because there was a point after that moment. I don't remember what time. If that happened when I was 7, this might have happened when I was around 8-ish, 8.5, maybe 9. And my mom picked me up from my babysitters after school, and I knew that the other older good kids in baton were at the gym practicing. I knew that that was happening when I wasn't there. And I remember very specifically thinking, I want to be like them. I want to be that good. And I know that the only way I'm going to get that good is to show up and to practice, because I know one of the reasons that one of the other kids in my class is really good is because she practices a lot. And so I asked my mom, she picked me up from school one day, and I said, can I go to the gym and practice? And she said yes. And ever since then, I had been I never looked back. Like, that was the moment that I started practicing almost every day. Eventually it became every day. So there was another little moment where this fire happened. And then I could keep going. And what I did in preparation for this episode is, like, all the times that I had to lit that fire, all the times that I had to light that fire from myself in my own determination. And I went through a list, but I'm going to tell you these 3 moments that happened really, really young, because it's this thing that has always been with me. And the last moment I'm going to tell you about is in 1995. It was the first year I did it was called a level A freestyle. So a freestyle is the routine where you pick your own music. It's 2.5 minutes long. You go out into your basketball-sized court floor and you perform your baton routine that includes dance and baton tricks, the rolly stuff, the little cool little tricks around your body. You have to do gymnastics. Like, you have to have all the elements, but you get to pick your own music. So it's like your own artistic thing. And it was the first year that I had done level A. So that means I could qualify to compete at Worlds. And I had no expectations, because the only other year I'd done a freestyle, I had done level B, and I won level B in my province. So I was like the provincial level B freestyle winner of like 1994. And I thought that was cool. And then the next year we moved up to the advanced level, the level A level. And so I had no expectations. I didn't know how well I was going to do. And by that point, there was the 3 of us, my 3 teammates, whom I started baton with at age 5, and we have grown in the sport together. They're like my 2 best friends. It's the 3 of us. We do everything together. We have like a little team and duets and like all this stuff. And having no expectations, I didn't do my best in my compulsory round. If you've watched my TikTok, you will have seen when I explained what compulsories were. I dropped 2 compulsories. And compulsories are these like little routines that are set routines, and you do them, you get scored under 10, and then that score counts for 25% of like your artistic overall score. And so I dropped 2 compulsories, so I had a really low compulsory score. But then I went out there and did my freestyle. We have to do it 3 times. You have 3 different rounds, like a preliminary, semifinal, and a final. I did all 3 rounds, and I made it to the final round. I was like, that's really cool. But because my compulsory scores were so low, I got 7th maybe, and only the top 4 go to Worlds. So my other 2 teammates, Holly and Chelsea, Holly got first or second. She's a badass and always got first. And Chelsea got 4th. So Chelsea was the alternate athlete. So the top 3 go to Worlds, and then the 4th person is the alternate in case somebody gets hurt or gets sick. And I didn't make the team. And I was so used to doing everything with these 2 girls. And for me, I had no expectations, but then suddenly I had this expectation of like, well, my friends made it. What about me? I feel left out. And I cried and I cried and I cried. Like, it was devastating for me. But what that did for me after I returned home was, again, it lit that fire. Because now Holly and Chelsea spent their summer practicing to go to Switzerland, which is where Worlds were. And what was I going to do? Sit at home and do nothing? No. I showed up to the gym every single fucking day with them, and I practiced just as hard as them. And I was there every day, all like long practices. Like we were there from when the gym opens to when the gym closed. And that was a moment. And I remember hearing from my coach and other people around me at the time that was a moment that they knew that this would never happen to me again. And I improved a lot in that summer because I was just pushing. I didn't have to practice my routines. I could practice whatever I wanted, which was kind of nice. I had a lot of fun. But that drive and that determination and that fire of like, you are not going to put me down. I'm not going to accept this as an answer. That came from me. And at the time, 95, I was 10 or 11. And that came from me. And that is something that has stayed with me my entire life and my entire career. And the way that I want to bring this into reframing is because for a long time, I've told myself, hold on, let me actually stretch while I do this. I have not been doing my splits. So sorry. I used to do them every day. Now I don't. So now we're going to do them here. So talking about reframing, there's been moments in my life where I have had to work so hard and I feel like I'm getting nowhere and people are constantly overlooking me and putting me down. And again, this is like these things that I'm telling myself. So this is the story that I'm telling myself. I'm using these words. People overlook me. People always look up. Ignore me. They can't see me. They don't recognize that I'm working so hard. And I'm saying this, and by saying that, I'm making it become true in whatever is in my energy. And I disappeared. And this is not working out very well. I'm so distracted. But my kitties are here. Okay, I'm going to have to sit on the floor and do this. All right. So I've been constantly telling myself of like, I've always had to work so hard to prove myself. Like, why won't you see me? You can't see me. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Because that's sort of what was underneath that fire that I was talking about, is this like inner like, oh, I'm not good enough yet, but I will show you. And I keep repeating that same pattern over and over and over again until eventually it just sort of manifests in my life like that, of people just not quite getting me, not seeing me. Maybe my energy's a little bit weird. There's a little bit of desperation because I need validation and I need people to notice that I'm working hard. And it all comes from this space where I had to really pick myself up to push forward. And like, yeah, it's such an admirable trait to be able to light that fire, especially at such a young age. Like that didn't come from anybody but myself. I don't know why that came included in the Michelle starter pack, but it's there. And holy shit, is it ever strong? Because like sometimes to my own detriment. But what it is that is a really positive trait about me and one of the things I'm most proud of. But then I end up telling the story of my life in a negative way because it feels like I've always had to work so hard for it. And I've had to really like dig deep to find this energy and find this determination. And so then I end up telling the story from a negative place of like, I was told that I had no potential and then I had to show them. And then I spent the rest of my life trying to prove to these people, the like ambiguous them, that I'm good enough and nobody can see that I'm good enough and nobody's recognizing that I'm doing all this hard work. When really it's just me reiterating that story over and over and over again. And it's not actually doing anything for me anymore. Like maybe it would have like satisfied some sort of dopamine fix at some point to like tell the story and get really emotional about it and really intense about it, even though I'm just kind of like that all the time. But there again, all these little stories I say about myself are just leading me down that path to embodying it in reality. And so what I'm catching myself doing is as I'm processing and telling my story and getting into some like sometimes dark and deep and emotional shit is, am I telling it from a space of empowerment or am I telling it from a space of it feels so good to like go into the negativity and I feel emotions and like adrenaline and hormones come out of that, and I just want to feel something. So I'm going to keep telling that story because that is the story that I have programmed into my body, and it makes me feel good for that tiny little moment, but then I don't feel good because I know I'm just sort of complaining. And I have been accused of complaining before. And I actually recently had a friend call me out while I was getting new headshots. And I was saying that, like, what was I saying? I was saying that I'm nobody's first choice in film or whatever and everything. Excuse me. Sorry, my cat is scratching the chair. I don't know why this chair that I found at a vintage store is the chair that my cats absolutely have to scratch. Anyway, so I was telling a friend that I was just discussing, I hadn't seen her in probably about 10 years, and we were just like catching up on like our careers and what the industry is doing. And I was saying that, yeah, like I've worked so hard and I feel like people can't see me and I'm fucking over it and I'm tired of playing by the rules and I'm just gonna go do my own thing because I'm tired of being nobody's first choice. And she stopped me and she was like, okay, that's fine, but the more you say that, the more that will be true. And you just took the energy in the room from up here and tanked it. And I was just like, whoa, fuck. And that's not the first time I've heard that. I actually had an ex tell me that when I am light, I light up the room. When I am not light, I suck the life out of people. And so that sort of like was like, oh, fuck, that's not what I want. But what I realized in that moment is in order to heal forward, you have to start telling a new story. It doesn't mean that you change the details. It means you shift your perspective from that story. So rather than me telling the story of my life about how I always worked so hard and I always got second place and nobody ever saw me and I was the only one and there was nobody there to support me, it was like I sometimes really struggled. And I knew that I could be more and I wasn't going to let anybody stop me. And there was these moments in my life where I had to light my own fire. See the difference there? I'm telling the same story, but it's coming from a much more inspired and empowered and lighter place. And that's something that I'm really cognizant of because it happens so much. It happens all the time where you're just telling yourself, oh, I'm always like this and I'm always like that. Like for my example, for myself, I'm like, I always feel anxious on Mondays. Well, is that because I always feel anxious on Mondays? Or is that because there's certain things about Mondays that I'm programmed to believe I need to do? And so I get caught up in trying to please and feel validated by the outside world rather than going within and focusing on what feels good for me in the moment. I don't know if that was the best example. I did write notes, but have I read them? No. But the notes say, it's about the awareness. So if you want to shift, you want to change your life, yes, you have to take action. You have to take imperfect action. But the way that you interact with those actions and life moving forward after you've made that choice, okay, I'm going to shift, I'm going to make a change, I'm going to try something new, is what has to accompany that is you have to tell a different story about your life because you can't heal and you can't move forward, you can't evolve if you keep running the same programming that you've been running for decades. So imagine, here's the example. You've downloaded a program onto your computer or onto your phone, but the program needs to be updated. You get that little notification of like, Mac needs you to update. And if you keep running the same program without updating, the computer gets slower and slower and slower, and certain features don't work because they do that on purpose. But you understand what I mean. Like if you don't update the app or you don't update the software, then you never get to use the full capacity of the software. And our brains and our nervous system are like totally the same thing. We're just a supercomputer that moves. And if you want to shift forward and you make all these changes, say, I'm going to start a podcast. And it's always going to be a little bit, if I don't shift my perspective and my story to fit the current frequency that I'm trying to live in. Gosh, I don't know if I'm articulating myself. But the only way to do that is to, the only way to shift those old stories and those old narratives is to be present enough to catch yourself in the moment and be like, oh, hold on. Is that really true, or is that an old program that's just allowing you to sort of sit into that negativity or that lower vibe or that lower frequency that you're used to living in? And that's the hard part about this, is that you want to shift and you want to change, but making those shifts and making those changes is not what your body and your nervous system is used to. So when you do make those shifts and changes, it actually feels really uncomfortable and sometimes weird and sometimes scary. And until you sit in those feelings enough, they're going to feel weird and scary, but it's so much easier to pull back into what you know, even if you know it's not serving you. It's so much easier to just sort of sit back and I'd be like, oh, I know this isn't good for me, but it feels good and it feels familiar. And so finding the capacity and the awareness to be so present enough, because we can't be totally present all the time. Being aware and present enough that you can catch yourself in those moments of being like, oh, I'm telling that story again. And for me, it's happening while I'm mid conversation with people. And I'm like, oh, hold on. Okay. I'm going to say this in a different way. I can still say what I want to say, but how do I say it in a way that's not condemning myself to repeat the patterns that I'm actively trying to shift out of? And that is so hard. Even me saying that it's so hard, I'm just making it hard for myself because I believe what it's hard. And what you believe is what you will see in your reality. It's kind of getting into this woo-woo space, but not, because it's I know that there is science behind it. Did I bring up an article or bring the stats? No, but you can look it up. There's a whole pattern recognition that our frontal lobe does. And that is in order to keep us safe in the world. But when we're in a space where we're actually actively trying to shift into a new reality, if we don't believe it, then we're never going to be able to shift. So if you believe that you're not good enough, or you believe that you will never be able to make it to the Olympics, you will never make it to the Olympics. Maybe the Olympics isn't a great example because only a few people make to the Olympics, and I could have had my sport been in the Olympics. It's a sad topic for me. If you believe that you could never be a dancer, I'm not saying how good of a dancer, I'm not saying a professional dancer, but if you believe that you can't dance, then you're probably never going to dance. You're probably not going to go outside your comfort zone and take a dance class, a beginner dance class. And you're probably not going to find opportunities to go out to places where people dance and dance. Or you're probably not going to put on music and just groove in your own home, because you believe you have this negative story going within you, or this limiting belief and this limiting story that you are not a dancer. You are not a good dancer, so that means you can't dance. So that's what I mean by whatever you believe is what your reality will be. And you will find ways, again, pattern recognition, you will find ways in your life to confirm that to be true. So until you are aware enough to catch yourself in the moment of these limiting stories, you're going to keep repeating the same effing cycle over and over and over again. And for me in my life, I'm just very tired. So I'm currently in a moment in my life where I'm choosing to light my fire and make a choice and followed determined imperfect action, because that's actually something I'm really good at. And I'm not going to come from a place of I'm feeling so unsatisfied with my career and I need to change and it's just not working. No, I could say that. I could talk a lot about how I feel about the way my career has gone and will go, but that doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because all I have to do is make a choice to either stay with it and shift my perspective about it, or shift and try something new, which is what I'm doing. I'm choosing to light that fire. So in a roundabout way, all I'm trying to inspire a thought within you is, in order to change your life and make a significant change, you have to be willing to tell yourself a different story. So you can have your story, which makes you you. You wouldn't be who you are today without all of the things that have happened to you. But the way in which you perceive and view some of the things that have happened to you makes a huge difference on the reality that you create and the reality that you receive. So if you want to shift into a more higher vibe, if you want to shift into having more fulfillment and happiness and success and love and joy, you have to be willing to tell yourself a new story. It doesn't negate or diminish any of the incredibly challenging things you've been through in your life whatsoever. But those are in the past now. So if you keep reliving that trauma over and over and over again from the perspective of being in that moment, then you're just continuing that trauma to live in your body. Whereas you can look at it through a different lens, because hindsight, you get the opportunity to see, you get the opportunity to zoom out and see like, oh, what was behind that? How did I react? How was I feeling in that moment? Great. Thank you for this information. I'm going to use it. I'm going to store it. And now I'm going to use that to filter other things out and tell the story that I want to that I want to tell. I don't mean to diminish or simplify anybody's trauma whatsoever. Trauma is incredibly complex and complicated, and it's not always as easy as well, I'm going to tell myself a new story. And you will know those moments in your life that potentially need a little bit more work or support to find your way through. I'm talking about just the little stories that we tell ourselves every single day from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed. Telling this story and repeating these stories over and over and over and over and over again until it's just a software program that we just download into our body and runs on autopilot. That's what I have to say about that. I'm reading a book right now. I'm not reading. I'm audiobooking a book. Right now, I verbed audiobooking. Watch my left splits here. This is my not great leg. Okay, see, I just did it again. My left leg has been the leg that historically has required a little bit more work in order to maintain its flexibility, but I definitely don't stretch the way that I used to. I just kind of don't want to. And also, I've just realized how being a little bit hypermobile, how it actually wasn't necessarily really great for my body. So I do mobility in other ways now, but I don't really need to be able to do the splits like I used to, so I don't. I probably should. It would be nice to just be able to whip them out every now and then. But I'm audiobooking this book by Dr. Joe Dispenza. You've probably heard of it. It's called Becoming Supernatural. And he talks a lot about that, where there's a certain amount of reprogramming that you have to do if you want to create shifts, because we're so good at going on autopilot and running through these patterns and conditions that are just downloaded through our bodies over a lifetime. And it takes a very conscious effort to shift out of those patterns. So that's something that I am currently working on. And I hope that this inspired you to notice those moments, because it does start with awareness. All change, all of it starts with the awareness. And sometimes what I've found in my life when I'm going through cycles of change is I may be consciously, intellectually ready for a shift, but my body and my nervous system and unconsciously I may not be ready to shift. And the cycle of starting a shift most likely for me will start with an awareness of it, because there's no way that I can shift out of like sort of pessimistically telling my story for my whole life to I'm now so inspired and empowered to tell the story from a lighter, happier place. That's going to take time, and I'm gonna experiment with it. Oh, the cats are fighting now. And I may not get it right every time. That's the thing. And I'm willing to be called out. I'm willing to have other people that I know and that I trust push back and be like, hey, you're doing that thing again. because sometimes that's what it takes. And sometimes it doesn't feel good. Sometimes you're like, oh, fuck. And if you're like me, I always think that people are mad at me and that they don't like me. Like I just come in assuming, again, here's my limiting story. I come in assuming that people don't like me. And then when people call me out or things happen or somebody doesn't talk to me for like a week, I'm like, they're mad at me. They don't like me anymore. They hate me. They think I'm annoying. They think I'm an awful person. Like that is a story that runs for me automatically. And so I have to catch myself in those moments of like, no, my friend called me out in that moment where she said, you're bringing the energy down because she cares. And just because I don't talk to somebody for so long, or maybe they go a little bit silent in a text conversation, doesn't mean that they suddenly decided that they don't like me. That's all me. That's all me and my perspective and my trauma mirror, mirroring back on myself. It happens a lot. So yeah, that's something that I'm actively working on in shifting through. And like I said, I'm not going to always get it right, but at least I'm going to try. And if it's going to eventually, over time, take me to a space where I feel a bit lighter, my energy's a little bit lighter, and I'm not always so hard on myself in my brain with like intrusive thoughts, then I'm willing to do the work to get myself there. But it can't come from anybody else but myself. So I get the opportunity of using this inner fire that just came with me when I entered this reality. Thankfully, it's great. It's really helped me in some moments, but I get to use that and lean into that because it's something that's just inherent to me. So I hope this episode was helpful for you. I hope I got my point across. Oh, the cats are yelling. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Oh man. Oh no. Please let me know what you think of the podcast down in the comments below. Please leave it a 5-star review if you liked it. And can you hear them? Oh, hello there. Hello there. Can you sit, please? I will give the kitties a treat if you stop yelling at each other. Ozzy, good. George, good. George and I have a special high five. Will Ozzy do his fist bump? Low five. Good job, Oz. Okay, George. Up 5. Low 5. Fist bump. Hello, sir. High 5. Double 5. Good job. Double low 5. Nice. Good work, sir. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful for you. I hope that it inspired just an idea of some things that might help you in your life in some capacity. If not, that's cool too. Feel free to leave me a comment down below if you like the podcast, what you like about it. And if you like this and you're listening on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that it may be listed, please feel free to give it 5 stars. I'm just out here trying my best. That's it. And I hope that you will join me again next week, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye.